Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome Rob Moyer, Head of Partnerships at Gong. Rob, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I know we've been going back and forth for a bit through emails and chat, and I follow you a lot on LinkedIn. We're a super heavy Gong users across the board, and on marketing, on sales, in customer success, product management loves the tool. I wish we had it, much earlier, but we got this couple of years ago. And everybody in the organization now know that I would go in and every call, every conversation, figure out what the hell's going on. So it has been an amazing journey. And I'm super excited to talk to you about, what conversational intelligence is doing across businesses. So welcome.
Thanks a lot. I mean, I got to tell you, it's been an amazing run here. Just seeing all the transformation, I've seen multiple transformations over the last 20 years in our industry. And this one's kind of nice to have a front row seat, in this and like the impact that AI is having on productivity and our lives is amazing. People are in different camps, but kind of sitting in front row seat with Gong, it's been fun to watch.
I can only imagine. We're going to get into that, but before we get going, it would be great if you'd please take a minute or two and introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, so I think my claim to fame is I'm one of the few people in the channel that have been both at scale and startup. So I was fortunate enough to have a nice run at Microsoft where I ran US distribution just at the beginning of the era of cloud. Then I transitioned over to Synnex pre-merger, and I was the day one built their cloud marketplace, literally not joking, from a napkin into hundreds of millions of dollars, and was an early Google partner, etc. So that was a nice part of the career. And then, as I got to the end, I lived in the Bay Area, and the one thing I actually hadn't done was startups. So I did a few over the last few years, landing at Gong, and I loved it was building. We were a day one partner org with no revenue to what it's at today. So yeah, I just have a passion for building and kind of the transformation of partnerships.
So you're one of those unique people, that worked at distributions as well as large companies, and then on startups and again, large companies. So I want to go back a little bit on your journey over the last couple of decades or so. What was ecosystem like when you're getting started, let's say, both on the software side as well as the distribution side? What was it like?
It's funny. It's a question I look at a lot of the similarities. I've been very fortunate. Early on, I looked at it as you kind of create anchors. So I kind of was forced into an ecosystem play early on. So, with Microsoft, it was such a partner-friendly environment. Selling Microsoft was much more than Microsoft. You had to align to all the ISVs. So you just kind of had a natural flow of what are attach rates, what technologies work well together. And in hindsight, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because when I went over to Synnex, it was the same thing. It was like, hey, they're a little bit of a hardware company. How do you build a software cloud practice? And it was those roots of Microsoft saying core products, ISVs are, back in the day, it was follow the developers. I still think to some extent today, it's the same thing. Those solutions that attach were huge. And I've just kind of carried that on throughout. Like even at Gong, we have 250 integrations. We were very friendly, open API. And it's that ecosystem within an ecosystem drives stickiness with the end user.
Yeah, and Microsoft has been sort of quintessentially focused on building out various dimensions of it. We've been a Microsoft house from the beginning. I was in Honeywell and Philips and Dell. We worked with them as partners. They have amazing organizations in place. But when you move to distribution traditionally, was kind of a bank and a warehouse and a training ground, right? And with funded head kind of a model. But talk to me a little bit about this whole notion of putting marketplace together, what you did there. How did they come about? What happened? What was the journey like?
Well, I was fortunate because I was coming off of a stint with Microsoft. So I had a very good understanding of how the marketplace, and back in the day, you looked at it as the cost of goods sold in mid-market and SMB. You looked for scaling plays, and distribution was always there because ultimately, how do you manage? You can't directly manage everybody. Even in partnerships, you got to have this long tail. So at Cynics, we focused on the long tail. And then for me, I'm very simple and I talk about it a lot on my LinkedIn. It's like you can get lost in a lot of strategy or you can just focus on a few things well. So even in the early days of building the Cynics cloud marketplace, when everybody was telling us, oh, you got to get as many ISVs as possible, I was going, let's master Microsoft and let's do that well. And let's do it in the least amount of clicks so you have a great experience. And so we did a huge business. We started with E1. I still remember it being controversial. I go, let's grab as many seats and then we'll upsell them. And then we're going to add ISVs. And I looked specifically at attach rates. And so everything I've ever done in my career has been very simple. Like I look at the big picture and I go, where's the quickest win? And then from there you build and evolve. So that's what we did at Cynics. Today it's a great business as they merge with Tech Data, but it all started with like this very simple idea: execute just on Microsoft and then expand. Actually, it's how we got Google. Long ago, the reason we got Google at Cynics was because we had a great Microsoft practice. I can say it 10 years later.
Which is great. So when you look at business model perspective, right, distribution played sort of the center of the universe for a reach perspective.
Yep.
When companies attain certain velocity, they had to go to distribution. Even for a software, it was shrink wrap software. You ship those boxes. Later on, you ship that Excel with the license keys on it, and later on, of course, SaaS came around. So and when you look at from a financial perspective today, right, whether TD Cynics or Ingram, these are 60, 70, $80 billion companies, but making like $1 billion or barely breaking even, right? So the value that they used to create and capture, that power has kind of gone away, right? So they have scale from a distribution wise, but from market valuation wise, dollar perspective, you take an equivalent of, a software company at a fraction of the size, they're possibly valued 10, 20, 30 times more, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think happened to distribution? Why were they were such enablers of value creation, but they were not able to keep it?
Yeah, that's a slippery slope because I would argue on one hand, they're profitable. And, the one thing I'd always say is profits still matter. Um, Are they as valuable? No, but it's also relative to size. They're consistent engines. So I do think a lot of things out there, like the hyperscalers, what they're doing is kind of taking away that software piece, but hardware still matters. The NVIDIAs, all those are still going through distribution. I do think I just wrote a little piece on this. I do think there's got to be a change between both the ISVs and the disties because there's a couple scenarios where I see if I was an ISV in like the education space, I would absolutely go to disty because they have state and local contractual vehicles to get there. I think the issue is we peanut butter everything. So yeah, they definitely have to evolve, but there's still pockets that I would lead my strategy there. But it's like anything else, everything's evolved. So, when I looked at my strategy here at Gong, in the early days, I went after the traditional partnerships and I immediately found that it didn't work. So I pivoted very quickly. I think every vendor has to be very conscious of where their ICP is, but I talk a lot about it, their personas. Because I want partners who are talking to the personas who buy my product. In my case, it was RevOps, it was front office, salespeople, etc. And a lot of other companies, it's back office, it's IT still. So it's not just ICP anymore. It's ICP plus persona. That's really going to get you the best return as a vendor in my mind.
So let's kind of build on that a little bit. So, we have distribution as customers that use our PRM platform. And then we also have hyperscalers that are using distribution to onboard and train partner. Majority on the tail side, that, as you mentioned, that model is still there. But let's say if I'm a mid-market company, right? I'm trying to expand reach where distribution critically played role before. And I'm a software vendor. What is the framework I should use? Going back to your, comment about focus, instead of trying to do too many things, do a few things well. Should I focus my resources on marketplaces because that is the biggest distribution platform today? Or should I focus on, sort of, lack of a better word, kind of an old school bank and a warehouse kind of a distribution? Or what should be my evaluation criteria? How would I pick that?
Well, I always look at, I think of the world in terms of flywheels. So when I built out this, I thought of it as like, let's pick 7 flywheels. We ended up consolidating to 3. You want to see each one. So, the problem with just taking a singular focus is you bet and then 6 months later there's nothing. You got to start over. So I placed a few bets and then I kind of tested the waters. And I think in your question, one thing I would look at is even the marketplace, it's like it's noise. Everybody's on it. And how are you going to stand out? And, most of the people in partnerships, this is where the disconnect. You're measured on partners sourced early. You get the luck of being end to end as you're mature, service partners, retention, upsell. But in the early days, you're focused on source. So I would argue neither are your first places to look because they're great at accelerating what you have. The early days, I'm a big believer in boutiques. Find boutiques, get wins, build your ecosystem, then you're ready for marketplace or distribution. And they both have their own pluses and minuses. They're both scaling mechanisms. Marketplaces, especially in ISVs, mid-market, but you're still one of many, one of thousands on a line card.
So if I'm trying to build, let's say, as a mid-market company, go to market motion, but kind of similar to what you talked about Gong doing, going direct in the beginning, then building, partner-based systems. From looking at, if I'm anywhere between ACV, let's say 30 to 100K range, right?
Yep.
How do I find these boutiques that I go after? Because these partners are super busy, right? They're not waiting for a vendor to come in.
This is where I love kind of what I do. And even I built that GPT. The new role of a partner manager's changed. It's no longer you can just go to distribution, find your partner, or go to marketplace, find your partner. You have to outbound like an SDR. So it's kind of like you're building your kind of first version of IPP, ideal partner profile. I put a spin with persona, but there's so many tools now that you can use to find it. But then to me, you have to outreach. Some of our best partners here, it's because I had partner managers that just did cold outreach on LinkedIn. Because what we did is we said, hey, we want to go after a certain segment. We were looking at a certain CRM vendor, and we went, who their top partners. It was very similar to what an SDR does or a self-source deal of an AE. And we went after like 10 and got 3. And then we put them in the system, and it ended up working because they aligned to our ICP. They're selling to the persona, and there's always selling involved. We sold them on why to work with us. So I think that's where the mind shift and the mindset of partner managers have to change. It's like you have to be more like an AE or SDR and go find them. It's not going to be magic that, here's all the partners. They all want to take your call. I think to your point, they're all busy. We're in sales. We have to sell.
So let's talk a little bit about, let's say, I recruited 10 partners or 20 partners, right? Then what happened next in your mind in that sort of an ACV range, 30K to 100K range?
Yeah. So I'm very process person, and it depends on what tools you use. I happen to be pretty much what a lot of SaaS vendors are here. Slack, I would do Crossbeam, I would do certain workflows. But for us, we'd start with account mapping, and then we'd have a Slack channel. But for me, the first step was we'd create like a collaboration doc. And some people use things like there's tools like they're built for direct, but partners can use them Align, Trumpet. I simply use Google Docs. And what we did is we'd have a customer collaboration doc. And in that collaboration doc, it would have everything from like, what's our 30, 60, 90-day plan? What is our joint value proposition? And then after account mapping, we would very much segment which accounts we're going after. And then we just literally would work it. The other thing we do just to hold it accountable, both sides have to do it. So we have our goals, like maybe the goals are 10 introductions to accounts, 5 introductions to CSMs. but you have to start with something that's tangible. And my test is in the first 90 days, are they working that doc or is it just us working the doc? If they're not mutually invested, we tend to like move on. But for the most part, I find the partners that are all in will definitely be a part of it. And the beauty of using our own products, we attach all our calls in that doc to just like keep everybody accountable to what's going on.
So I want to go back from the beginning a little bit. So you got the partners.
Yep.
Can you please double click a little bit on that account mapping thing? What do you mean by that? I understand what you mean, but I'd love to have you explain to our audience.
Yeah, because before I go into a deep dive, I want to see what is the potential. I use account mapping slightly different than everybody else. They do the full workflow. I want to know it's possible, and then from there, like I want to see the crossover. How many accounts are they in? How many accounts are similar prospects? Because I'm very narrowly focused. That's the first step, and just because there's a low crossover doesn't eliminate them, but it does change our approach. But say it's in the middle, there's a good amount of business. Generally speaking, we have bigger targets for them than they do us. But it really gets us into understanding who are their customers, what type of customers. So when I look at account mapping, most people go straight to, okay, let's run our play. I go to, do they have the profile of customers to make this a successful partnership? It's kind of like, in my mind, I don't want to say chess versus checkers, but it's like there's a lot in that account mapping. I think a lot of people just use it for that overlap and go run a play, like I said, where I'm looking, is this really a worthy partner? Can we be successful? Do they have enough people in our ICP and personas that we can be successful? But from there, that's when we go. I force every partner to this day. We want to Slack.
So once you've sort of figured out, and what's the typical sizes of these partners?
For us to get off the ground, we were starting small. The boutiques crushed it for us. Now we're getting into the big partners. But I kind of view it for every partnership. We do the same thing because part of this is a test in my mind. Because a partnership has to be two-way. And if it's just one way, and I tell this to our PAMs all the time, if it's a one-way relationship, it's not a relationship. Like if you're doing all the work, that's not a relationship. So in many ways, like while I'm describing what we do, it's also the test. Are they active? Will they do account mapping? Will they do the channel? Will they do the collaboration? Because for me, I'm looking for 3 deals, not one, because that's a partnership in my mind. If you get 3 deals, they're going to build a practice around you. Everybody can get lucky with one. And at the end of the day, everything I'm describing is time management. Like, are you going to invest? Because that's where partner managers and leaders die. Are you spending the time on the right partnerships? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, completely makes sense. So okay, so now you map their accounts.
Yep.
And I want to go back to this doc that you have, collaboration doc. So every partner you have, is it a business plan? Is it a sales attainment doc? Like what is in that doc, like that you're pulling it together, working with the partner?
I think of it in the most simple terms as a collaboration room. It's a living, breathing document. It starts with what are our mutual goals? Then it's like, I call it the checkbox things you need, like an enablement, joint value prop. Like you have to understand the basics. And then we kind of have this list of what's our action plan for the next 90 days and what are our milestones. And what we do is we use it to drive our QBRs because I want to understand, did we accomplish it? At the end of the day, I don't need it to be perfect, but I need to see progress. What this doc is really driving is progress. And for me as the leader, I can go in and dive in and see where we're at. To be honest, it's one of the best things that we've done because it really tells you who's all in. But everything, it's common sense in a lot of words. Everything that you think you have to do to be successful in a partnership, you put it in that doc because it holds accountability to both sides. Because ultimately, if you can't come up with a joint value prop, and this gets back to if it's just my team creating a joint value doc, it's not a joint value. Rob. And so that's where I push for this two-way accountability.
It's pretty amazing. So now we have a doc.
Yep.
It's residing in your CRM and integrates with your Slack. That's what I'm figuring.
Yep.
And then the Gong conversations that you're having are layered upon that, so that there's a continuity. So someone like at an exec level, you can go into a partner and get visibility. Is that what I'm kind of hearing? Like what is going on?
Yeah, it's a little bit of that and a little bit of, I and maybe this is a little old school, but I assign goals to every partner. Like we have to deconstruct how we're paid. We typically have like sourced and all these different goals. And, I want to make sure our partners have it. I've talked a lot about this, but every opening conversation with a partner is I talk currency. I'd go like, here's our currency. What's your currency? It's not always going to be perfect, but it's that overlap that's going to drive this partnership. And that's what I really track, because some partners thrive on the attach rate of services. That's how they make money. I still need partner source as part of my currency. So even with my service partners, I'll go, hey, make up a number for this call, but like I go, oh, you got to do 250,000 in partner source for this to be successful partnership for me. Now, what do we have to do for you for it to be successful? And once you kind of negotiate that, that's the North Star of the partnership. I'm very clear. Like when we do our QBRs, I just did a couple this week, and it's like, here's what our goal was. Here's where we're at. Here's what we need to do in the second half. How are we going to get there?
It's pretty amazing. So, one thing I love in Gong is the forecast dashboard where it goes through the band and kind of tells you probability wise whether this deal will close or not. So, how do you do that at an aggregated partner level? Did you build something in Gong that you can look at your, sort of a stack ranking of your partner and say, this has the most probable partner that I want to invest in? Or like, is there something you look at that level?
Yes, this is the thing. I probably have the most side conversation with partnership leaders on, because I do think we have the best in class forecasting for partners. So for me, I give scenarios like they're basically drop down menus, whether you use HubSpot or Salesforce is in your forecasting model. You can create, like I have partner source, co-sell, influence. It'll automatically tag the partner into those deals, and then I can forecast. And I have like AI partner forecasting. And when I show this to other partner leaders, they're just blown away. And they're like, how did you do it? And I go, I created an attribution model, which I've been very public about. And then that attribution model drives what category it's going to be in Gong. And then I can look at a deal board and basically go, in a quarter, here's all the deals that are being forecasted. Here's the partner attached, and then I can drop down my screen from source to co-sell. And I will die on this hill. I think it's the best forecasting tool in partner land today.
That's powerful. So I want to go back to those three categories that you just talked about, right? One is partner sourced.
Yep.
And then co-sell and influenced.
Yep.
And so let's go back to the first one, because I want to overlay sort of the enablement piece. Gong is a pretty comprehensive product. You have multiple modules.
Yep.
So you can't just throw out a partner and say, go sell, right? So you have to enable them because it's a solution. And we loved your team, by the way. I was involved in some of those calls just for the sake of it, that how Gong sells. I was pretty impressed that how they went through. We were trying to buy too much, and they knew that deal was going to slip to the next quarter because we're trying to evaluate so much. They very effectively downsized the deal. They said, hey, let's just get started. I got this discount going in these modules. Buy that, and then your CS will work with you post-deployment. You can buy these other stuff. We'll still maintain the discount rate, right? That was impressive because they were trying to hit their number. You can clearly tell. But how do you teach the partner in those sort of level? One is the functionality of the tool, but then also the Gong sales process that your direct side uses. How do you enable them? What is your process like?
Yeah, so this is where I kind of deconstruct like kind of sales enablement for internal and product enablement. Because, when I look at it, and I've said this from day one, and I'm proud to say it's worked. In the early days, we were conversational intelligence. Now we have forecast and engage. And what I would tell our partners is the best partners sell a solution. It's not just about Gong. Although I love that it's about Gong, it's about the experience of how to leverage and unlock all of Gong. So a lot of our partners, especially on the engage side, they'll have great understanding of like, well, it's Chili Piper or Lead IQ or Sixth Sense, Mad Kudu, all these different things, even Clay. Um, so when they look at doing a solution, they can look at all the automated workflows that come off of Gong. And for them, they make more money because they work with our whole Gong collective, and then the core business is off of their Gong services. It's a great model because it drives stickiness and it gets to that like we solve a complete solution. And I think that's huge. For enablement, we're like, I think we publicly said we had over 1,000 updates last year. So you can't use static enablement like you do. So, we use a lot of modern tools, whether it's like sending videos, we do a lot of enablement, because what I've kind of trained our partners is like what you knew about Gong a quarter ago is completely different because we just keep adding features. And so we've kind of trained, it was more about training our partners to expect to evolve your understanding versus like a very specific tool. I think we talked a little bit on the front end of this. Enablement's probably the trickiest subject in today's world because the power of generative AI, the ability to train people. The nice thing about Gong is some of the tools are just naturally great for that, but for partners, they've got to learn more. So it's a constant chicken and egg. I'd say 1 month I'm feeling we did great, and the next month I'm going, oh, we're behind. So my advice is to train your partners to expect change and then try to keep up with it. On the Gong process side, it's really about, trust. It's like getting to know us. Like our older partners tend to do better because they understand our model. The newer partners, I tend to be very cautious. It gets back to that currency. I want to see a couple wins before I start making introductions. I'm not a person, nor I've ever been in any company. That's not a Gong statement. I want a couple deals under our belt before I will start introducing to internal. I just feel strongly like anybody can do one deal, get to 3 deals, and then we can talk.
That makes sense. So I want to go back to the enablement piece a little bit.
Okay.
So you're sort of feeding them because you have these 1,000 updates, so you can't just do like once a year certification. So there's like continuous learning. What is your mechanism for delivering that? Is it through your Slack channel? Is it you host webinars or like feeding them 30-second clips? I love your help portal, which
Yep.
is for direct users to
Yep.
use. There's content now, there's the generative interface in there, there's a lot of stuff in there. Do you have an equivalent version of that for partners?
So I'd answer in all of the above. So we have, series like Get Your PhD with Gong. That's a one-to-many. We have sales engineers that will constantly do training. Then we have an overall partner enablement that will do the high level training. So I tend to believe in all models, a multi-touch model. And then the final piece is I have to say one of the things I did early, and I love that the partners are doing it, is I got them all in a room. The market is so big. Some partners don't like to get in a room, but they learn from each other. Like I have one partner, shout out to them, go Nimbly. They have an engineer that will do a Friday feature Friday on LinkedIn and do Gong. And then if it's a great one, I'll send it to my other partners. Because my partner community is like, yeah, they're competitive, but they're all growing and it's such a new space. My partners are helping each other. There's little things that happen. I was just talking about this week with a partner. Last year when Google changed some of their rules on email, it was a partner that discovered a lot of the features were a Salesforce setting that unlocks spam. It wasn't a Gong problem. And so they shared it together amongst the partners. So it's something you can afford when you're on the smaller side. But I also think we've created a great culture amongst our partners that there's enough business for everyone. You just have to. We're constantly just trying to evolve together because RevOps is a new space altogether for the most part.
Very much so. So we talked about recruitment. We talked a little bit about enablement. Let's talk about sort of performance management, and then we'll talk about incentives.
Okay.
So what is your structure? You have this 3-deal threshold. Once they pass that, you're now working with them, supporting them, bringing to your accounts, they're taking to other accounts, possibly co-marketing. What is your structure for managing that performance? Going back to your earlier philosophy, do a few things well. How do you focus on these few partners? How do you treat them differently than the others are sort of climbing up the ladder?
Well, it's kind of we're an interesting space because I'm not a big believer in holistic performance because I have like lanes. Like there's the GSI lane, there's the agency lane, there's a private equity lane, there's tech partnership lanes, there's AWS marketplace lane. I don't want to create any point systems. I just like I want to treat the best performers in each lane the best. So I do look at revenue heavily. I look at things like, customer sat scores, stuff like that, because ultimately it's that 80-20 rule. It's probably 90-10 in startup land or early stage land. But I want to focus on helping them because the needs of those 5 different channels are different. And I don't think a program can do it. Do we have a program? Yes. It's meant for different things, but I'm very focused on like I kind of have a flywheel approach. Like everything I do in PE has their own marketing, has their own webinar, their event strategy. Everything is specific to that. It's not apples to apples in everyone. The GSIs are much different than PE, and tech partnerships is much different. In fact, I would say even when we were talking about co-sell, that's why I'm so passionate about like this notion of co-close and co-sell. Certain channels are just naturally made to co-sell. But when you get into service partners and GSIs, you want that co-close, which is much different standard, but you can't really apply that to other channels because it's just not the way they're built. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So I want to take maybe a couple of these lanes and a couple of the types that you mentioned. So I'll let you pick the lanes, but if I go back to your original framing, partner sourced and co-sell, if we stay on those 2 types of deals, are there any specific lanes that generate more for you than the others? And if so, how do you work with those couple of lanes?
We went from 0 to many, and they all seem to be doing well. What I would say this is AWS is more of a co-sell, speeds up sales cycles. We're getting there. I can see that evolving quite quickly. That is the most classic co-sell, but I think the higher standard is in my agency and GSI. I know it's still classic, but we don't resell. We're one of like we don't do any of that. So I put a big view on quality co-sell. That's why I'm pitching to the world co-close because I think the best partners are there from the beginning and they're helping you close the deal. Like I see this evolution. If you think about how partner influence was big 4 or 5 years ago, I don't even pay on partner influence anymore. Like I've pivoted my team. Like that was a great way to start when we had no business, but that is such a light touch. I measure it only in partner impact, but it's co-sell and it's source. And getting down to co-sell, it's really being granular. Like one of my favorite things to do is measure what is the win rate in co-sell versus direct. And then I can start really breaking down the quality of co-sell. Like where I see programs going in the next year is deconstructing co-sell. Because some co-sell is like great. It's part of your business. It's like obviously you want to speed up sales cycles, but the gold medal is closing deals. And so I envision this co-sell being bifurcated over the next year or so. I definitely will be an advocate because that's how you get resources. The more you can prove the actual impact, the more likely you're getting more resources.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the co-sell because, as I said, I have a little bit of experience going through a direct sales process. So I would love to understand how. But I want to come back to these lanes.
Yep.
So do you see, for example, if you take a marketplace lanes without being specific versus an SI lane, right? Is it fair to say you have more velocity and volume through marketplace, but your profitability is lower because these private credit buyers coming in try to buy based on, and SIs are larger deals, slower velocity, but higher profitability because they're not competing as openly? I just made that up, but I'm saying, do you see differences by lane, velocity, volume, and profitability?
I'd give you a slightly different answer, but I fundamentally agree with you. Like the marketplace lanes definitely are scale. Like I think everybody needs to have a marketplace strategy. But I'd also tell you quality of win is better. So I'm not going to talk about profitability, but I'll talk about quality of customer experience. Because if you think about marketplace, a lot of it is that last mile procurement cycle. You just made it easy until it's like a full, like this made it better. I would say tech partnerships and services are much more quality wins because there's stickiness. Like I know that I'm locked in for a couple of years, and I know that the partner is going to stay with that customer for a couple of years. Same with the tech co-sells. Like if you're selling Gong with Chili Piper, they're going to be using these tools for a couple of years, and it's stickier. Where marketplace is like a procurement vehicle. I'll probably bust into jail by saying this publicly. I love AWS and Microsoft, but that's the way I view it.
Got it. So then I want to go back to that, your sort of, co-sell sort of phases. As I understood, and I vaguely remember because it's a few years ago, it's a multi-step process. There's discovery, there's early demos, then there's right sizing of the solution, then sort of, budgetary pricing, then pricing negotiations, agreement, final approval. So it's like a 6, 7, 8-step process, right? So do the partners add more steps to it, or do they accelerate? Are they critical point instead of engaging all 8 steps that your team engages? Like, what is the collaboration part of the how does that work out?
I think it depends. Like if you look at private equity, it's going to be more about executive alignment, recommendation, and then peer recommendation of portfolio groups. That is huge. That's why that's such a strong channel. But if you get into like services, my example would be deal cycle gets stuck. You bring in a trusted third party expert that says, "Oh, I work with 3 of your tech stack vendors. This is how it'll work with Gong." You instantly get credibility, and now you have a partner to help you close the deal. Where I truly think, and I love marketplace, but it's still to me more like it's a math game. You're buying down credits or you're speeding up per your cycles. Now, I would say this is the experience of me. I think a lot of back office solutions are a little bit more integrated in these marketplaces, probably have a different look and feel. I ultimately view they will all evolve. Like I think marketplace getting better. We're starting to get more intros. It's kind of like a numbers game like distribution. The more you go through marketplace, the more likely they're going to help you full circle, not just procurement. But I still see that as an industry evolution, if that makes sense. And I might be the outlier on this topic, but I'm very focused on the measurable outcome of the impact.
Okay. But I want to go back to the tactics of collaboration. So I think you kind of talked about the strategic overlay,
Yep.
One lane versus another. But let's say there's a deal is happening in 30 to 100K level through a partner, whether it's an SI or an agency or, someone who works with a private equity group that has 20 in their portfolio, whatever that is. How does your team collaborate on that deal? Because as I understood, on the buyer side, there are questions like how do I integrate with my HubSpot or Salesforce, and how do I build this forecasting? These are relatively complex questions for a user that has never used a sophisticated tool like yours, right?
Yep.
So where does your team engage with the partner in the co-selling process? Can you give some specific examples?
Yeah, I think, and it depends on the motion and maturity of the direct seller. The beauty of Gong is we usually hear it, and or we get an early reach out on it. So that is like one big advantage of Gong, not just to pitch Gong, but generally speaking, we triage right away. Like um, our best sellers already know who are best in class at what in the Gong ecosystem, and they'll bring them in fast because at the end of the day, it's about closing that deal faster. So, we have a Slack channel of just partners, and it's full of questions every day. And it's like, I have a customer said this, boom, my team is all over it, and we'll find the right partner for that question. So, I feel like we do run a very modern organization, like just something as simple as a Slack channel that every person in the company can go, I have this problem. It could be a CRM integration, it could be a dialer, it could be anything. My team monitors it, boom, within less than 24 hours, you will have a partner aligned to helping solve that problem. So that wasn't a quite direct answer, but like I'm kind of giving you the view of we have the system set up to bring people, because we're a real-time company. If you think about the beauty of Gong, we hear it right away, and we have an actionable. You can share the snippet, you can go on Slack. We really are very quick to get involved.
That makes a lot of sense. So I want to go back to the system level a little bit.
Yeah.
So is it a mandatory requirement for all of your partners to use Gong, and how does how do their conversations sync with your CRM? Do they have to now connect to your CRM so that the data flows? Like how does that mechanically work?
The answer to the first part is yes, they use it. But data privacy, we could never connect our systems. But them using it, they understand the benefits. That's the thing that we push. There's very few partners that don't use us. Generally, to win long term, you have to. That's part of our program.
Got it. So now, I want to keep an eye on the time here, but moving into they're performing, they're selling, what is your incentive framework look like? So when you think about partner sourced, co-sell, where both parties are quite, involved, and then sort of influence, which you're saying less and less you care about. It's the old school affiliate model. Like how do you pay them? Do you pay them by stages, pay them by achievement, pay them by close? Like, how does that look like?
Yeah, I'm going to break into jail on this one because if I say too much, I'll get a bunch of Slack messages after they see this. Here's the way I do it. I don't over pivot on any of these incentives. Like I know the rest of the world, like they have to. I literally focus on their profitability through more of a net. Like my view on incentives is this: if we have to unnaturally incentivize them, there's probably not a business for them to build around Gong. So we do have referral fees for Partner Source for the first year because we want to help with their profitability. But I I I stand by this, and I think it's a slippery slope for a lot of leaders out there. But I really focus on how are you going to make money supporting Gong. That's the incentive, because if you sell Gong, we're in a good space. You're probably going to sell two or three other vendors that will add to your ability to make money. Like in the old school, and there's a lot of merit to this coming from Microsoft. They used to say, for every dollar of Microsoft or AWS, you sell $7 of services. I've never totally believed that. What I do believe is you get $7 when you count all the attach. So like I think the same thing for Gong. Like they can make money by servicing. We're a modern API, so it's not 9 months to deploy Gong. It's less than 90 days. So that's not the moneymaker. The moneymaker is sales transformation and modernizing their tech stack and being kind of an agent for change and attach over a few years. But they generally are, if they're selling Gong, they're selling two or three of the Gong collective, and that's total compensation. I think that individual incentives, I felt like they're just artificial. If it's a partnership that's meant to be, they're picking us because they can build a business and make money off of us, not because I'm throwing them.
And that makes completely sense. Like, if I'm like a blogger on cooking or sports stuff, and then I'm just, directing traffic on merchandises for transactions and I want to get 50 cents, then the affiliate model works. In case of your solution selling, where you have to really go and solve a problem, a pretty major problem tied to revenue and retainment. So they get paid on their knowledge, and you're an entry door and an enabler. So I think your structure completely makes sense. I want to keep an eye on the time, so I want to end with one question. First of all, we have to do a follow-on session on this, but where do you think conversational intelligence is going, Rob? And what penetration do you think it has had so far in 2025? We've been talking about this for about 3 years. Gong started it almost a decade ago, maybe a little less. But, now it's hitting the street. What do you see 12, 24 months out, level of penetration it should have, or from a revenue ops perspective?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to answer it directly from a Gong lens because I think the category has been established. Like what Gong did is established a category. Very few companies have done that, like with revenue AI. What I do think is the parallel to everything is kind of the stuff you and I talk about offline is like what has done is really helped push the narrative of actual AI that helps you. And it's like you can break that down into all the workflows. Like everybody's going to generative AI. It's going to be the one or two things that actually do two things. It's more than just saving you time because all AI has done is consolidated information. It's the ability to give the insights. And I think where you'll see is, I always think of this where Gong has done amazing is where the system of action. You start hearing that. I think it came from our customers. You have system of record, which was what we lived in the past. I won't name names, but it was a system of record. AI is the insight. Gong is the system of action. I think you're just going to see an acceleration that AI takes all that information, gives you insights, and now helps you on the action part of whatever your role is, whether it's in sales, professional services, all of it. I see it all transforming because AI is going to help you with the next steps much quicker.
That's amazing. Well, with that, we're going to wrap this up for today. But speaking of system on action, we got to get our lunch on our schedule. I know we've been going back and forth. We're both Bay Area residents, but it's been an amazing conversation, Rob. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.